Greetings, and welcome to the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. In each episode, host Kirill Tokarev invites video game industry leaders to talk about the world of game development. No topic is off limits as long as it relates to video game development. New episodes are in the works, so remember to follow us or subscribe and share with someone you know will also enjoy the podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're super busy with the launch and everything, and you have a lot on your
Oh, no
plate.
worries.
But I think I got an email from John. I had a look at the game. I think it's very impressive, and I kind of wanted to kind of discuss more, learn more about your company and you and how you kind of started this development. It would be nice if you can do like a little intro to us for those who
Sure.
haven't played the game yet.
Yeah, no problem. So we basically began. I had never developed a game before this one. I actually worked in the film industry, working in sort of like coordination, production coordination, and for VFX. And I wasn't particularly enjoying my role. It wasn't very creative, and I had this idea for a game for a very long time, for about 5 years before, to make this big, large-scale, hardcore World War II game that sort of encouraged players to use teamwork. And at the time, this is back in sort of 2015, Unreal Engine just became free to use, and that was kind of the thing that pushed me to download the engine and at least start tinkering around in it instead of just playing games. I basically said to myself, okay, well, instead of playing games, why don't you try and make one, and let's see if there's actually a kind of a cool outcome from this. And so I began just downloading some Unreal Engine marketplace packs and opening them up and trying to figure out how they worked and stuff like that. And I made some screenshots of French countryside and showed them to people on the Unreal Engine forums, and I kind of pitched my idea. And two guys who have been my partners to this day basically said, "Oh, those look not too bad. The concept sounds quite cool. We'll come and join you just as a hobby project. No one was getting paid, and we'll try and make this game." And obviously, it's a crazy, crazy, crazy idea trying to pitch 100-player, 100-player, shooter with lots and lots of physics and massive maps and all this sort of thing. And we kind of just thought, well, just take it slow, take it one kind of development goal at a time, and maybe we'll get somewhere with it. And so we started work on it in 2015 and 2016, and then we kind of had, just for a 3-man team, we had we were kind of getting somewhere. And then a fourth and a fifth person joined us. And then we said, okay, well, we should probably aim now for like a Kickstarter to try and give us some funding, because otherwise we're gonna, we'll never get this thing made. And so we then ran a Kickstarter in 2017, at the end of 2017, and that we were really fortunate, but that succeeded, and that raised enough money for us to continue developing the game, and we basically continued developing the game into 2018, and brought some more team members on, and it's just, and then essentially we started working with Team 17, a publisher, who were able to kind of give us the QA and the support needed to be able to take the game through to completion. So it's been quite a crazy story of people who have never made a game before. Sort of, they basically say, don't start with an MMO as your first game. That's normally the joke, is that people start with an MMO, and we didn't start with an MMO, but we started with something similar.
Yeah,
But I think,
yeah.
our team is like a success story of I guess how easy it is to learn tools like Unreal Engine, and kind of work remotely. Like I've never met any of my colleagues in real life.
I just wanted to say that, yeah, it's kind of like the illustration of how development became, I hate this word because everybody throws it around, but it's like more democratic, like democratized
Yeah,
development.
I know what you mean. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the democratized buzzword, but it really is the
Yeah, yeah.
case. Yeah, I mean, we really could not have done what we did without it. And
So
yeah,
you mentioned you kind of, this whole story kind of started with you exploring Unreal and playing with assets from Unreal Engine Marketplace.
yeah.
So in in your perspective, do you actually play around a lot with Unreal Engine Marketplace? And if you do, what kind of assets do you usually download? Are those, 3D environments and asset packs and stuff, or are you looking at some more complex plugins, SDKs, and
So typically, when we were first starting out, I basically just downloaded everything essentially to kind of have a look at everything. Obviously, trying to download what I considered to be like the best looking stuff. And I've always been, I'm kind of the art director on Hell Let Loose, and have very much, I'm really interested in art, in the way that different assets integrate together, and then obviously how smart can you be with the assets? How much can you reuse? And trying to figure out philosophically like what matters most to the visuals of the game. And I think like when you're starting out, you think that variation matters a lot. And then now we're kind of at the point where we realize, no, it's more about, quality over quantity. Players don't normally sense repetition more than they sense just poor texture quality or an ugly model.
yeah.
So I downloaded a lot of like 3D stuff in early days. The Maui photo scan, like forests, were really cool.
Oh yeah, he has the best. He has amazing or like
It's
nature
yeah,
assets.
it's just, I mean, it's just phenomenal. It's incredible, and you can immediately tell it's his work whenever you see it. Um, but then as we started to go on and on and on, like we had some marketplace packs in Unreal Engine at the start, so we didn't really use. We're very fortunate that we have two really fantastic senior developers who really knew what they were doing from kind of the start. So we didn't really ever have to rely on any kind of blueprinted or kind of marketplace SDK type stuff. Normally, what we'd found is that it was sort of, written to be very general, and nowhere near specific enough or optimized enough for our purposes with obviously a 100-player game. So it was nearly always better to just write something specific for us rather than kind of purchase or look at Unreal Engine marketplace packs on the programming side. But but I think the other really great stuff is done by, I think his name's Robert Berg, who's at Embark. Has done some incredible forest
Oh yeah,
environments
I
with.
know him. I know this guy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He does
Yeah,
the
he's
photo scanning stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Amazing work as well. So a lot of it, our goals from day one have just been to push towards kind of the closest thing we could get to a AAA outcome. And I think that studying the marketplace packs really helped us understand, okay, why are they doing that? Why are they doing this? And understanding good workflows, good texture packing,
Yeah.
understanding how a particular
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
material might work. Um, and now I would say that we don't really, to be honest, we don't really download. The closest thing we'd use to a marketplace pack now would be like Megascans,
Yeah.
and it would more be to really quickly, like sort of gray box an area, and then I think in the future we'll end up just using the models, particularly the rocks and the cliffs. We'll bake them, get the macro normal, and then just we're almost entirely moving towards a smart material workflow.
Mm-hmm.
As much tiling and repetition as humanly possible, so that we avoid like those really, really, the VRAM budgets, and we can stay beneath them. So Hell Let Loose has been really hard though, because there's still work in there from when we didn't really understand what roughness levels should be, or what specular levels should be, or things like that. And now obviously we I think are very, very, we're like any other kind of moderately professional studio, and know everything about texture packing and keeping master materials clean and consistent and stuff like that. So Hell Let Loose is a funny game because it's almost like two games in one. One game made by a really rookie studio, and then a second game made by a studio that knows the power of procedural materials, knows the power of Unreal Engine. We understand the differences between draw calls versus instancing. Do you instance or do you HLOD? All those sort of kind of higher end complex
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
optimization problems. So yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a long answer.
No, no, no.
But
I
it's
think
definitely been
I
a
think you kind
journey.
of mentioned everything because I remember that I was covering your game back when it was still sort of like in the mod stage or like an experiment stage. It was
Mm,
like in the early beginnings, and I saw some of it, or maybe somebody sent it to me like on some of the forums, and it's great to see that it's finally finished, that you're actually launching. That's amazing. But I have another question apart.
mm,
Like since we started talking about this whole idea of that it's become easier to build games, um, apart from the graphical part of it, which you kind of mentioned because you worked a lot with photogrammetry stuff that you downloaded and you kind of worked backwards, trying to understand how those things work inside those packs. There
mm.
is a large layer in Hell Let Loose that is connected with multiplayer because you have
Yes.
this huge number of players and you have like RTC elements, RES elements there.
Mm.
And I'm wondering, did you actually guys write the whole technology for that, or are you using maybe outside solutions like PlayFab or something else to kind of help run? Because it's a lot of coding to do.
Yeah. So I can hand on heart say that all of it is built by two guys,
Oh my God.
James and Roman. Yeah, yeah. It's yeah, unless you know how hard it is, it's hard to fully appreciate. And I'm not a programmer, but I understand how insane. What like I very rarely get to sort of boast is the wrong word, but be proud of the work these guys have done in most contexts. Half the time, we're having to sort of say, oh, we're going to be working on bugs and all the rest of it. But yeah, the entire game, all the infrastructure, all the everything was built by two people. Um, and to say that it has been a crazy accomplishment, I think. I mean, I know you understand.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy because I
Yeah,
see I see your game and I think of like I don't know, like Battlefield or something like that. Looks amazing and it also runs these huge numbers. So
Yeah, it's what those guys have accomplished is nothing short of like a miracle. It's basically like
Mm-hmm.
like a fighter jet while you're flying the fighter jet, and you've got none of the normal tools that you would need to build it. Um, it's been nuts, and the way that they've done it. I mean, I think that honestly, having a small team, having two guys who could just bounce off each other constantly. And obviously, we tried to schedule it from a production perspective where we would always let them know, okay, guys, this will telescope out in this way and that way, and this will become more than this. So don't code yourself into a corner. Um, but it's been crazy. I mean, like you look at the 2 years we've been developing this game, and it's probably, I hope, going to be the hardest game we ever make, just because, when we started the game, when we released into early access, we had 3 maps, and no progression system, no customization. We couldn't even lean in the game. You can't even lean. None of our animations used IK. And these guys have literally overhauled extremely fundamental infrastructure in the game, alongside obviously like multi occupancy vehicles that are all physics based. We didn't even have dismemberment in the game when we launched, so we've added,
Mm-hmm.
added dismemberment. Yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy what they've done. They've kind of, for better or worse, managed to, yeah, I mean, I think implement,
And for
yeah,
anyone who's kind of listening to this, is that the all the features that you're kind of adding, that's extra work for the network, basically. If you're adding
yes,
dismemberment, that's extra work. So they have to
yes.
think about more, elements and transition more data between machines and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a lot of very, I guess, sophisticated work done there just on the terms of like making this whole thing run.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it, it's really hard to understate what they've accomplished with this. I mean, and to be honest, like from a technical perspective, most of the limitations we face with regard to like our kind of community feedback are quite frustrating, because they generally tend to be Unreal Engine side limitations. So um, things like anti-aliasing, we all know
Uh-huh.
that Unreal Engine. I mean, it's not, none of this is to obviously like do down Unreal Engine or Epic, because obviously it's a tool that is meant to make like 70 different types of game, and it just so happens
Yeah.
obviously that anti-aliasing for games where you're shooting like squinting with iron sights, it's just, it's not a great solution. It's pretty either jagged as FXAA or it's very blurry for the TAA, and we've tried to compensate for that with lots and lots of different stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, things like finding PhysX crashes,
Mm.
both server side and client side. I mean, server side PhysX crashes that can occur, you know, it can occur 1 in 10,000 times, and you're trying to replicate this with 100 players in a server. Stuff like that has been really difficult, because obviously you can add logging obviously to try and catch PhysX crashes, but what's going on inside the PhysX is very difficult to kind of pin down. And when you have 100 players able to throw 100 grenades on, while
Yeah.
bazookas are flying around and on our vehicles as well. I don't know if you know, Kirill, we check angles and we bounce rounds off the side of vehicles,
Mm-hmm.
and those rounds stay alive so they can actually
Wow.
blow up. Yeah, so it's that type of stuff tends to be the really hard stuff to fix. And then also there's some funny stuff in Unreal Engine. I don't want to get too into the weeds or bore anyone, but just even discovering that when you use meshes in spleens in Unreal Engine 4, it basically duplicates it compounds the memory usage of the mesh, because every time it creates a new instance of the collision of that warped mesh, it adds to it. And the only way that you can see it adding to it is by checking the memory size of the map, or the level. So that stumped us for a long time. We're trying to figure out like what every asset in the map is so much tinier than the total memory size. We finally worked out, it's not really documented anywhere, it wasn't back then, that by having like roads in the map that use static meshes, it wasn't just using one mesh over and over and over again. It was like using 10,000 different meshes. So stuff like that has just been insane to discover and try and like fix and try and figure out. And there's,
Have
as you
you?
know, there are so many nuances.
Yeah, I just to kind of wrap this part about the Unreal and the services. Have you used any of the Epic online services that they're providing? Stuff that they announced, I think, a couple of years back.
Which online services particularly
I
specifically?
think it's like anti cheat and some of the others, like their server infrastructure, and so on.
I don't believe so. I know that what we're using is we basically, like most first person shooters in Unreal Engine, we took shooter game and then, to say we built off it, I mean, there's probably nothing left of shooter game now in the project, but it's a good first place for your movement component and a basic weapon system. But I mean, we're using Easy Anti Cheat, which obviously has just been sort of acquired by Epic. Camu were acquired by Epic not too long ago.
Yeah,
So nothing really. No, we're using Vivox for our voice solution, which has been really tricky. Vivox
mm,
obviously is a Unity brand, and Vivox have said to us that we are the people who are using Vivox in the most complicated, large scale, humanly possible. In so much as, you know, we're joining 100 players dynamically to a proximity channel, a unit channel, a command channel, and then having to like rotate them through them all as they die or change units or different things. So I think that's really about it. There's not, I mean, and obviously physics, but that's kind of the out of the box Epic solution. But
yeah,
nothing specifically. We looked at Steam Audio, we've looked at other stuff, and it's never quite done what we would need it to do, really.
I got it. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the game itself and kind of how it connects with the audience, right? Because it's the kind of title I think that has a specific, I wouldn't say niche audience, but kind of has a specific audience that can, appreciate this feature when the rounds are kind of bouncing off of, edges of vehicles and that kind of stuff. So it's like
Mm,
people who are into more authentic stuff, people who are enjoying this era, right, and enjoying these kind of more. I don't want to dump down kind of other games, but I think with yours, you kind of give more freedom for strategy, a little bit more emphasized thinking on a battlefield. So it's not just,
mm.
shooting and gunning people down as fast as you can. So I'm wondering, how did you start working with your audience, especially with the when the development process was so long and there was like
Mm.
you were looking for the team and so on. So what were like the first points of connections with people? So how did you start building this brand so to make sure that you will have the audience to kind of sell the game to and also maybe test and exchange ideas and figure things out?
Yeah, so no, it's a very good question. Well, basically, I spent a lot of time playing a mod called Project Reality back in kind of 2007, 2008, 2009, all the way through to 2013, 14, although Project Reality still exists today. And Project Reality is essentially a mod for Battlefield 2 that kind of does some of the things you see in Hell Let Loose, but in a kind of modern warfare context. And the game was a really niche. It was a very niche game. Still is a very niche game, but it was played by a whole bunch of people who then went on to make other stuff, which is really fascinating. So, for instance, I'm relatively sure that Dean Hall, Rocket of DayZ, was playing PR back in 2008, 2009, and a couple of other guys. I'm pretty sure Brendan, who's behind PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, was playing PR as well. I might be wrong on Brendan, but I know there are a lot of guys who basically saw what Project Reality was doing, which was basically the fun of the game in a shooting game wasn't just that gameplay loop of killing people, but it was planning, teamworks, and kind of pulling off different strategies rather than just that mechanic of aiming and firing. So that kind of it was a starting place. I actually met the kind of chief operating officer of my company, John, who also managed our community and marketing in the early days. He was a Project Reality player as well. And then early on, when we were thinking about like who might be interested in Hell Let Loose, because obviously, at that point in time, this whole concept was very niche. Squad were about the biggest title that was doing something similar to this at the time, back in 2015. And that had only just launched, and that was considered very niche as well. So, and that was sort of a spiritual successor to Project Reality. And so I had a big think, and I thought there were a couple of content creators on YouTube who were only the very few covering these types of games. So I reached out to a couple, and the person who was the most excited was Blue Drake, who's a YouTuber who at the time was really covering Project Reality, covering Squad, covering lots of tactical shooters, and he was wonderful. I can't talk enough about how much of a favor he did us in the early days by basically shouting us out on Twitter and like bigging us up when we announced. And he gave us our initial following, and I think other content creators saw him doing that, and he kind of continued to encourage them. And basically that I emailed him, and he kind of came across, he started reading about the game. We had a chat, and he's like, oh, I really like the sound of this. And I kind of laid out our plan to him. And so very early on, he was the guy who gave us our first wind. And we had a website set up where you could basically go and put your email down, sign up with your email if you wanted like additional news. And we figured that would be a way that we could kind of at least keep a record of our community so that we could actually message to them and send them stuff that they might be interested in. So very early on, I think it was like June 2017 is when he kind of made a video about us and kind of explained it. And I always remember that first moment where we had kind of, I think I woke up and there was like 500 people had signed up to our email. And then a couple of weeks later, it was like 20,000. And then a couple of weeks later, it was like 40,000. And all of a sudden, we had this kind of at least enough following that we thought people would be interested in looking at it. And then from there, we then emailed those people when we then set our Kickstarter up. And that kind of was the community that's kind of, we've still got many people from that Kickstarter community and that even pre-Kickstarter community who still follow the game, and some of them have thousands of hours in the game. So that's sort of how it all kind of went. It went from us playing this one type of niche game to knowing guys who covered that niche game, to talking to them about our game. And then, and at the time there wasn't really anything like our game, for World War II. And that's sort of how it happened. And that's how our initial following was built.
So to kind of, if we want to get some advice to developers, it basically is you can launch this marketing PR campaign very early, right? You don't have to wait till you basically launch or start selling. You can do this 3 years before you even have a version that you want to sell, right?
Yeah, I think that my advice would be you just need to figure out the way that you're going to bring the product, bring the game out, get the game released. Are you going to, if you have an investor or someone like that, well, then maybe you might want to just work on it in private. I mean, we've had to work on Hell Let Loose and basically learn all the hardest lessons of our development life, while also having a community kind of watching our every move, which has not made things super easy. Although we love our community, it's certainly put a lot of pressure on. Whereas normally with development, there'll be lots of mistakes in development, but no one's watching you make those mistakes every second, every week, every day. So my advice would be figure out how to get there. If you're going to crowdfund, know that with crowdfunding, you always need to try and be as honest as humanly possible. As honest as you can be. Deception doesn't get you anywhere. And with Hell Let Loose, every mistake we've made, we've kind of said, yeah, that was a mistake. That wasn't our intention, or yeah, that went wrong. We're sorry about that. We'll try and fix that. And we have tried to be, absolutely just tell the truth the whole way through. And then, but then obviously if you're able to kind of bring the game out before then, I think you would, if you're able to bring the game out without having to sort of bring a massive community along with you who have funded it, I think then you probably would want to start talking to, people who play these games for a living. I mean, content creators and different people like that, and really get them to try it out and give a sense of it and what they like about it, and then listen to the things that they say. I mean, I think that even if we didn't need to crowdfund any future games, which we may very well be in a position where we don't need to, we would still look to build a community of testers in the early days who might be interested in playing whatever type of game it is we're developing, because I think that it's always going to be easier for you when you launch, knowing that people other than you have played it, and you've been able to have a chance to listen to their feedback. And what you'll find is most players, the strength of your pitch is also going to give you an idea of how easy it's going to be to sell this, whether you're talking to, I think, journalists, media, or you're just talking to friends. If you're struggling to get people in to play test your game, I think you probably need to think about whether or not the pitch is strong enough, if the idea is strong enough. So that's really helpful for us, is that, I think really having to explain the game even to Blue Drake back in the day, his name's Connor, and he's since become a really good friend, but even since being able to, have to really explain the core of the game to him as fast as possible, and then explain it again in the Kickstarter, and then explain it to testers, and then explain everything all the time, it really refines your ability to understand what excites people about your game. So I would really recommend that even if you don't need to do it, you really want to get a core group of people who don't care really whether it succeeds or fails, to try and give you some honest feedback, because you'll be able to make sure you don't fall in any pits or traps as soon as possible in the development process.
So my question is, like, you have this very nice strategy where you basically took the audience that already existed, and you knew very well how it felt, I guess, what kind of games they like to play. Then you worked on top of this with the influencer who helped promote your idea and kind of I don't want to say promote, just communicate your idea to like the audience. Then you got yourself a list of subscribers, potential buyers, right? And then you launched a Kickstarter campaign. So was this, as any good plan, was it planned all along, or were you just kind of juggling and trying to figure out how to do this while you were developing, or did you have a clear vision of how you're gonna go into the marketing?
We did have a really clear vision of how we were going to go in, and the reason we had a clear vision is we'd seen other studios do it, and we'd seen Battalion 1944 do it, we'd seen Days of War do it, we'd seen Squad do it. So we'd seen several titles go down this path before, which obviously takes a lot of the fear out of it. And so we did have a very sort of clear plan, like, with our Kickstarter, we wanted to make sure we had a working prototype, so that when we were making promises in our Kickstarter, we kind of roughly knew what we could, not even roughly, we knew exactly what we could kind of offer to them. And so, we went in eyes wide open. And I think you really want to do that. I think you want to make sure you don't make huge promises that you can't keep. I think that'll inevitably come back to hurt you later on. It's that you might have a short-term gain, but I think you'll have a long-term loss in doing so. So that was all. It was really all very planned, and we were extremely fortunate that each stage kind of paid off. I mean, I think for people who are looking at doing something like this, no matter the game, there is someone already playing that type of game. And if I was to make any kind of game, be it like a card game or a roguelite or something like that, I would probably do something similar. I would look at what type of, what my favorite roguelite games are not giving me as an experience, what their weaknesses might be.
Yeah.
And then I would look at the people who cover them and who play them all the time. Maybe Co-Carnage on Twitch loves playing roguelites. There are some really other interesting kind of YouTubers who play them. And then I might not be able to get through to some of the really big YouTubers, so I might contact some of the smaller guys, but who have a dedicated following. But a lot of YouTubers and Twitch streamers, they love finding new content. They love finding exciting new things to talk about because it's something for them, something for them to have a look at, something for them to be excited about. So I think that there's, that's a really, I wouldn't say easy, but I'd say it's a really great way of, communicating that a new game is coming to a potential audience who will be excited to see what it's like.
Yeah. I think when you're kind of talking about this, and it all sounds very smooth and kind of, well thought through and so on. But I agree with you. It probably wasn't very easy because I think that
No, definitely
no,
not. No, I mean, writing the email to Blue Drake, I think it was like a 750 or maybe 1,000-word email. And
yeah,
I sent out like 12 of them. And I think 2 guys came back to me and actually had read their email. So,
hmm
you think, well, what happened if neither of those guys had read their email? And it does. That's not to say that you can just enact a plan and it comes true 100%. Obviously, it's I recognize that there's a lot of luck and good fortune in it, and obviously, a huge amount of hard work as well. I think
yeah,
something that a lot of developers would be really good to know is that even if you launch your game and it doesn't go exactly as you want, or it doesn't go very well, as long as you're not about to go bankrupt within a month, gamers are pretty happy to try something out again, see if it's been improved. I think most of the time a game is only over when the developer says it's over, really.
yeah.
I think that's something as well that you kind of learn. It takes a bit of the fear out of launching them because so long as you just keep communicating and you let your player base know, okay, guys, we don't like this, we like this, we're going to fix this, and you keep listening to them, they will come back and they'll try it out again. And that's the
And
lesson we've learned with Hell Let Loose.
yeah, I think the approach that you kind of described was um, basically studying your competitors, studying and understanding what the market plays and likes and how do they play it and what do they want and so on. It's kind of like the approach that is used everywhere in business. If you look around, like any big companies or small companies, and it's also what makes it valuable is that it gives you an understanding of what can you expect. So you understand how many players are there who are playing like roguelikes of a certain type. And then you understand how many people are actually watching those things on YouTube. So it gives you some numbers which you can put in your business plan and then show to a potential investor. And it makes life so much easier than if you're just coming from, you meet someone on the game event and say, hey, I have this wonderful idea for a game, but I have no idea if anybody's going to buy it. Right. So this makes it like more real even.
Definitely, and this stuff also makes you feel calmer. It makes you know where exactly what you said. It gives you a sense of expectation and knowing, like, okay, if we do this, then it'll probably go really well. If we do this, it'll probably go average, and then if we don't do this most of the time, it won't go very well. So it's definitely difficult mix. It's a difficult balance to get because obviously normally you start to run out of time, or you don't have the right people doing things, or you
Mm.
guys just can't figure out a problem. But definitely, I mean, I think, like, at the start of making Hell Let Loose, this type of game, I mean, Tarkov didn't exist then, and PUBG didn't exist then. So the closest thing to sort of like being a really, playing a really punishing game was probably playing DayZ.
Yeah.
And so, if I pitched Hell Let Loose to people, they'd be like, that's too hardcore. No one's going to want to buy it.
Yeah.
Whereas now, obviously, like I think, more than 1 million people have bought Hell Let Loose. So obviously there's a market there. And then anyone who wants to sort of make a game in the tactical hardcore shooter genre could simply just like look at Hell Let Loose, look at Rising Storm, look at Squad, look at Red Orchestra, look at all of these games, and exactly as you said, put together a list. And I mean, I think we're just living in quite an amazing age right now where, you know, you can be I won't say Hell Let Loose is a massive game. I think it will be a bigger game when we go on console, but we're not a huge game. And even then, we're still, you're still able to, there's still a massive market out there. There's still tons of players who, you know, even if you've sold, millions of copies, people will still be discovering your game
Mhm.
each day. I mean, it's just amazing. Honestly, it's something that's just staggering. And you look at games like Rust or Counter-Strike that have sold hundreds of millions of copies. I think Rust is probably close to 100 million.
Yeah.
And it just makes you realize, like, how many people, how many players there are in the world, and it should make everyone feel very optimistic in this industry, I think.
So you mentioned consoles, and I wanted to ask you about how do you feel about different platforms, and where do you want to sell your game? Basically, how do you see these sales going? Like, are you selling only on Steam? Do you want to go to other stores, like, I don't know, like Epic's one? Or how do you feel about the potential of going on like PlayStation 5 or maybe Switch or all those places? How do you see those games kind of, living in this ecosystem where there's still a bunch of different places where you can buy it?
Um, so I think fundamentally, with Hell Let Loose, it started out as a PC game. We had a really kind of grassroots PC backing, and obviously we were on PC and Steam because it's such compared to talking to platform holders like Microsoft or Sony, it's obviously much lower barrier to entry. And so that's sort of where we started. And I'd encourage most people to kind of start there because, you can, I think it's like $100 and you can register your product on Steam, your project on Steam. And so that's sort of where we started. We'd love to go to other PC platforms like Epic Store and other places like that, but just we really need to find the time to be able to hook in the different subsystem. At the time of Epic launching, they didn't quite have the subsystem needed to support a game like Hell Let Loose. But we're pretty agnostic on whichever platform we're on. We're just happy, obviously, that more players are jumping in the game. In terms of the console, I think that Hell Let Loose's console market, I think, has changed a huge amount. I mean, that used to always be sort of a quote unquote lean back experience where you'd only ever sort of play FIFA or maybe like kind of Call of Duty or something very fast on the console. But now you can really see, you know, with games like Hunt Showdown being on console and just the general and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, players on console also now all have microphones. They all have headsets, they all have microphones. And so we feel that, now's kind of the time to introduce, really I think possibly one of the first tactical hardcore shooters to the console
Hmm.
in Hell Let Loose and see what they think. So we're quietly hoping that that the same players who have resonated with Hell Let Loose on PC will exist on console. And we think so far, just from seeing sort of comments and some sentiment and things like that, that there will be players on PlayStation, on Xbox, who are excited to jump in the game. I think that Switch is probably not something we'd really go near with Hell Let Loose, just because Hell Let Loose is so graphically and network intensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I've said it before, but games are a young art form. Then they haven't really been around for very long. And I think what Hell Let Loose kind of represents, and obviously other games, Armor, Squad, lots of different games, but represent kind of the first-person shooter for slightly older players, people who grew up with first-person shooters, but now are kind of keen to challenge themselves, probably a little bit more, intellectually on the teamwork side. That's not to say that obviously Call of Duty or other games are not intellectual, but in a different way. Less about reflex and more about forward planning and things like that. So it's hard to know if a new audience is evolving for these games, or if and I count myself amongst them, an audience that would have not been interested 10, 15 years ago and was only interested in sort of Modern Warfare 1 or Call of Duty 3, Call of Duty 2, has now grown up. And to be honest, we're probably less, our reflexes are nowhere near as good as they were. And so now we're also looking for, we still love first-person shooters, but we're looking for an experience that's a little bit more than just reflexes and shooting. So I think that's kind of the way we're thinking about it is, these players exist. It's now just time for us to introduce them to something that they might be interested in trying out.
I can't agree with you more. Like the story that you kind of told me right now, it kind of reminded me a lot about the story of Wargaming, like the company that created World of Tanks, because their audience is very similar. And I think they discovered it when they saw how computer games kind of developed in the region, because they started in Russia and former Soviet republics, and it kind of blew at the same time. Basically, older people and younger people got involved with video games at the same time, and they were all playing like Quake or something and so on. And obviously, younger people started destroying older, like 30 or 40-year-old guys, and they were kind of like, in some kind of ghetto. Everybody was harassing them and so on. But at the same time, they also had the money to invest in a game. And that's where Wargaming kind of found out this niche and worked with those guys and now enjoys this tremendous success. So I totally agree with you that even on consoles, although some people might suggest there's only kids playing Fortnite on like PlayStation or something, there are people who have different tastes, and they have different needs in whatever they want from games. And maybe some of this is what you're providing, and that's why you need to know your market, basically. I guess if you want to summarize our interview for for the listeners and readers, is basically you need to understand the person whom you're trying to entertain. You need to understand what kind of
No, I completely agree. It was really interesting, actually. I knew a little bit about wargaming, but I didn't realize that dynamic had existed. But no, very, very similar. I mean, you think about it, right? And we are living in a world where no one over the age of sort of 45, and I mean this on a generalized population scale, no one over the age of 45 is a gamer in so much as they are Gen Z, in so much as Gen Z and earlier are. So I'm a millennial, kind of a mid-millennial. And when I was at school, sort of maybe 1 or 2 in 5 would play video games, and we wouldn't talk about it. It wasn't like we would talk about it with each other, but you were sort of, you were in a minority, I think, of the people who really, of what the interests of your age group were. Whereas now I meet people who are in primary school, and it's like if primary school, high school, and if you don't play games, it's almost like the population, the proportions have inverse now. So it's like 1 in 5 doesn't play games. I mean, and I can only imagine what it's going to be like again when when our generation is in their 70s and 80s. I mean, you're almost going to have sort of 9 in 10 people playing games, which is something that we've never seen before in world history. It's really, I think it's something that everyone's kind of underestimating, that if you think video games are big now, I mean, just wait 40 or 50 years. I mean, every single generation is going to be playing them. And I guess another interesting question is, what does a video game for like a 75-year-old or an 85-year-old look like? I'm sure they're going to have different tastes, to someone who is 14 and likes playing a game like Fortnite, which is obviously super fast-paced. So I find that really interesting, because instead of playing like bridge or mahjong or kind of the card games that we would normally associate with like retired people, I'm sure that we'll be playing video games. And so, yeah, I find all of that really, really interesting. And to your point as well, in terms of the market, I think, you never want to look at a market, or, and by a market, I mean console players or whoever, and say that because something doesn't exist, it's because it shouldn't exist. It may be that, you've actually just identified a perfect place, a perfect niche for your game. Yeah, definitely.
Agree. Totally. Well, Max, thank you so much for your time. I think I took an hour. So,
oh, no, my pleasure, Kirill. My
really
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. Check out upcoming episodes on the 80 Level website at 80.lv. Join our career site at 80.lv/RFP. And share our podcast with friends and on your social networks.